How We Won by Charlotte T. Zitlow, Chapter 11, The Student Vote, the Deciding Factor? There are those who to this day really believe that the results were a fluke, the mischief of irresponsible students dabbling in local politics. The 26th Amendment took effect on July 1st. From that day forward, 18-year-olds could vote. The Republicans saw this as their greatest threat, and to this day, some believe that is why we won. But this, too, would prove not to be the case. The amendment was a response to the outcry of both veterans and opponents of the war in Vietnam. If 18-year-olds were called to fight and possibly to get wounded or even die in combat, they should also be considered responsible enough to vote. The push for emancipation was aimed not only at voting, but also at licensing, drinking, and other age-limited activities. The change to the Constitution focused on the vote and provided a simple answer. The rights of citizens of the United States who are 18 years of age or older to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of age. The Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. The amendment was sponsored by Birch Bayh, Indiana's Democratic U.S. Senator, and drafted by his legislative aide, Larry Conrad, before Conrad was elected Secretary of State in Indiana. As the first major university town to hold a municipal election after this law took effect, Bloomington attracted national attention, and there was no shortage of focus on the process and the outcome as a test case. While the local Democratic Party did not include the student vote as its focus, other Democrats and the media did. Conrad, coming to Bloomington to endorse Frank McCloskey, not only encouraged students to exercise their new rights, but encouraged them to decide whether to vote in their hometowns or in the town where they were studying and spending most of their daily lives. State law was ambiguous about residency requirements, and so to clarify it, a federal judge in Muncie ordered Delaware County voter registration officials to register any age-eligible person who wanted to register. Monroe County Clerk Jamie Murphy simply stated, "We have not put any obstacles in their way. The law says where a person sleeps most of the time is his residence, and when they sleep here 9 months out of the year, that's their residence, isn't it?" Indiana's other senator, Vance Harkey, told students at the IU campus that this election was a critical test of the willingness of 18 to 20-year-olds to participate in the political process. He went on, "There is an idea in vogue these days that young people won't register to vote, and you will be tested by your participation in the city elections." Greg Dawson, reporting in the HT on Harkey's visit to Bloomington, went on to point out, "The heaviest student participation in Bloomington political history was forecast even before the 18-year-old vote was approved because of the controversial mayor and city council candidates and the increased concern of IU students with the city and the university. The casual assumption voiced by an excellent and fair reporter indicates the conventional wisdom that was embedded in the media coverage of the campaign. In an editorial entitled Equal Diligence, the HT admonished the League of Women Voters, which had set up voter registration tables at student enrollment registration, to pay as much attention to those real citizens off campus as it was doing for students on campus. The media failed to note the persistent door-to-door campaign citywide, where voter registration was the first round of organization aimed at all eligible voters. The IU School of Journalism reported in a student poll that students favored McCloskey 5-1. The student body president, Mary Scrifes, endorsed McCloskey. Projections of up to 5,000 votes as a result of voter registration efforts were bandied out. Democrats had students for McCloskey and Republicans had students for Hooker. There was a lot of energy focused on the mirage of students rising and taking over the town. It was a sky is falling mentality, and it was widely taken seriously. The eyes of the nation were on this little Midwestern city. The Wall Street Journal was quoted in a banner headline in the Daily Herald Telephone on November 1st. "Student vote has city on edge." Reporters came from the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Louisville Courier-Journal, the New York Times. Bloomington, Indiana, a test of student vote strength? Courier-Journal. "Young voters hold key to tomorrow's election." Bloomington Courier-Tribune, quoting the LA Times. NBC had their eyes on city. At the same time, IDS headlines read, "Small student vote predicted," and the IDS opinion page advised, "Local voting, use it wisely." An HT student poll wrote, "Demo leading, but apathy abounds." On the night of the election, the threat of a student takeover swirled through the reactions of the losing candidates. While later in the evening, Dr. Harry Day, defeated by a large margin by the somehow inferior candidate, stated that although he assumed all the students just read the voters' union literature and marched to do its bidding, he did not attribute his loss to the students, but to the town, who didn't know what they were doing. Earlier in the evening, however, Clyde Day was quite outspoken. "The student vote did it, and nothing less. You can give this election to the 18 to 20-year-olds. A month later, in a David Broder article in the New York Times, Jack Hooker was reported as bitter. He told the journalist, "The students voted blindly against any authority, against the establishment. They also voted blindly for anything that had a Democratic label. A tremendous effort was made by the young faculty at IU, a hard core of liberal activists," the mayor went on. "They indoctrinated and brainwashed their classes, and the students proved that they weren't as knowledgeable as they thought they were. They were not independent in their behavior. They were easily led." According to Broder, Hooker could not explain why these same students voted overwhelmingly for a Republican judge, nor did he substantiate his broad and nearly libelous statement about the professors that allegedly taught brainwashed the students. Nor did he point to actual verifiable figures that could prove there were 5,000 students who were going to or actually did vote. His burst of disappointment here was unsubstantiated in fact. With such a strong, ingrained conviction that it was the students who carried the election for the Democrats, we need a less fact-free analysis than has been directed at the issues in all these years. The facts are interesting and informative. According to an article in the Bloomington Sunday Herald Telephone on October 24, 1971, new registration soar, but voter totals down. Voter registration was closed by this time, and the official figures were compared to the numbers recorded in the 1970 election, well before the student vote was possible. In a university town which has a large contingent of transients, the rolls of registered voters reflect a huge lag in accurate count of present-day voters. Many who registered moved on, but were not purged from the rolls unless they had missed at least 2 election cycles. In 1970, there were 22,490 registered voters. In fall of 1971, the totals were 21,401, down 1,089, and all this despite new registrations in the period totaling 6,769. There were 8 precincts in the city where the overwhelming number of students resided at that time. A look at the record is instructive. Student-heavy precincts from 1970 to 1971, plus or minus. Bloomington 1, west of campus, in 1970, 1,018. In new, 322. In 1971, 919, minus 99. Bloomington 4, northwest of campus, in 1970, 1,711, new 434, 1971, 1,832, plus 121. Bloomington 5, north of campus, in 1970 had 1,722, new 1,189, 1971, 2,101, plus 379. Bloomington 9, campus to bypass south of 10th, 1970, 2,333, new 1,687, 1971, 3,009, plus 676. Bloomington 11, married student housing, 1970, 2002, new 445, 1971, 1,391, minus 611. Perry 1, southwest of campus, 1970, 1,389, new 388, 1971, 1,322, minus 67. Perry 2, south of campus, 1970, 983, new 338, 1971, 896, minus 96. Perry 3, southwest of campus, 1970, 895, new 199, 1971, 799, minus 96. Totals 1970, 12,053, new 5,002, 1971, 12,000. 12,270 plus 217. The net gain of registered voters in these student precincts was 217, not nearly the 5,000 so feared by the Republicans. How can this be? First, it is the nature of voter registration everywhere. People come and go. They move from apartments to single houses. They leave, they die, more come in to fill the ranks, and then they also leave. There is no question that the numbers of registrations here are quite large, especially in Bloomington, 5 and 9. These were also large geographically, and they were densely populated. There were a number of student dorms in them, but also a large number of apartments for faculty and many small owner-occupied homes tightly packed in the Green Acres neighborhood. They were not all students by any means, and it cannot be unremarked that in every precinct in the Democratic Council, candidates won the majority of votes, and McCloskey won in all but one precinct. Although it was seldom recognized in the media, the Democrats made a huge effort to register voters all over the city in traditionally Republican as well as Democratic neighborhoods. They also followed up with information, quite specific about the issues as described in earlier chapters, and they had one resounding theme: we need a government that is more responsive to and inclusive of citizens, no matter their community status, economic situation, race, or gender. Although this theme did resonate with voters, the Republican candidates seemed not to hear it. One can only speculate that in seeking some rationale for a defeat that was inexplicable to them, they blamed the students. One thing about the student vote that was not discussed in all of this was, who were the students who might vote? What were their interests? Were they really puppets, unthinking playboys and girls? Were they a mischief-making semblance of the Rat Pack? No doubt there were some who answered this description, and it's very likely that these students did not vote. They were busy elsewhere. But many students who actively participated in the campaign of the Democrats were involved in social issues and in the environment a year after the creation of the EPA. This was also the time when the public interest research groups, PIRGs, were just getting started, devoting their efforts to helping people on low budgets find decent housing and safe, affordable food. In fact, on November 7th, the Sunday after the election, Patrick Siddons wrote a headline article in the Louisville Courier-Journal entitled "College Students Turning Energies to Local Citizenship." In extensive interviews with IU student administrators, he was told that there was a clear and strong move forward towards constructive participation in the community, which was arising out of the protest of the 60s. Associate Dean of Students Virginia Rogers, known for her rigorous oversight, stated unequivocally, "There has been a conspicuous change in the kind of student involvement. They want to make their commitment substantial." And she listed a number of examples of recent fundraising and community building projects, Greek philanthropies, housing rehab, recycling, and more. The Indiana Daily Student, 3 days after the election on November 5th, ran an editorial entitled "The New Populism." In it, Tom Ross, director and founder of Student Legal Services, observed that there was a new populism sweeping the land, which is not so much liberal and conservative nor left or right, but a demand for the people to be heard. This was a message voiced by the Democrats who won the city election, and it should not be surprising that not only did local citizens respond to this cry, but student citizens subscribed to it as well. The overwhelming argument against students as the driver of the 1971 city election, however, lies in the raw figures of the votes. Historically, turnout for a general election is always substantially greater than that for the primary, at least twice as many, often 3 times. Looking at the presumably student precincts and the council races for districts 2 and 4, the comparable totals were within the usual percentage of increased participation. District 2, Towle had 1 opponent in the primary. Stipp ran unopposed. Bloomington 4, primary 617, general 963, up 56%. Bloomington 5, primary 347, general 913, up 163%. Totals 964 in the primary, 1,876 in the general, up 95%. District 4, Zitlow had 1 opponent in the primary, Day run unopposed. Bloomington 9, primary 427, general 1,400, up 228%. Perry 2, primary 234, general 467, up 99%. Perry 3, primary 388, general 586, up 51%. Totals in the primary 1,049, general 2,413, up 130%. District 3 included Bloomington 11, which was almost exclusively married student housing. In 1970, there was 2,022 registrations, and in 1971 general election, there was 1,321, including 445 new registrations. In the primary, there was 317 votes cast for the mayoral candidates, Democrat 236, Republican 81. In the general election, there were 672 votes cast, Democrat 486, Republican 186, up 112%, within normal range. District 1, not a student area, Morrison was not opposed in the primary. The percentage of increase in this Republican district was the highest in the city. Mayor McCloskey also carried these precincts, yet it was still not too far out of the ordinary. Bloomington 1, primary 88, general 292, up 232%. Bloomington 2, primary 168, general 343, up 104%. Bloomington 3, primary 125, general 386, up 214%. Van Buren, primary 42, general 167, up 298%. Totals 423 in the primary, 1,385 in the general, up 227%. The increase in votes from primary to general elections was not outside the traditional voting patterns and not especially high in the student areas. In fact, they were highest in non-student, largely Republican precincts. They came nowhere near reaching 5,000 student votes, so often invoked as the villain of the piece by the Republicans. College students voted for the first time, in other words, and the sky did not fall.